Bond 1 hour ago. Eddie Murphy testifies I left Hollywood because of Diddy. Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. What you're about to hear is not fiction. It's testimony, federal courtroom records from day 12 of the United States versus Sean Diddy Combs' trial. These proceedings are real. The consequences, even more so. At 9:04 a.m., the courtroom doors remained standard. The legal teams shuffled papers. No surprises were expected. But then, a side entrance creaked. Cameras weren't ready. Reporters missed their cue. And that's when Eddie Murphy walked in. He wasn't on the witness list. Not announced, not leaked. A figure from Hollywood's golden decades. The man once hailed as its crown jewel. And today he was here to break something open. The jury froze mid-breath. Diddy didn't move. A moment passed, then two. Eddie adjusted his tie, walked forward, and took the stand. No theatrics, just presence. When the judge asked his name, he answered clearly, Eddie Regan Murphy. Then came the words no one expected. I left Hollywood because of him. He didn't shout it, didn't even raise his voice. But those 11 words hit harder than any indictment. The courtroom braced. Outside phones began buzzing. By the time he leaned into the mic again, the world was already listening. Murphy began at 2006, a year of comeback. Studios were courting him. Offers came daily. It felt like the old days, he said. But then came the invite. A call from a producer, no names, just coordinates. A private residence in the Hollywood Hills. Nothing official, no public calendar, just one of those nights. The kind where careers are made, or broken. I'd heard of them, Eddie admitted. Everyone had. These were Diddy's infamous parties. Phone-free, camera-free, identity optional. Guests were told only one thing. Tonight be who you really are. Eddie arrived at a hilltop mansion with biometric gates. A valet suited and wordless took his phone and handed him a card. The phrase was printed in gold. Inside, the silence was loud. No music, no laughter, just murmurs and watching eyes. He recognized faces, executives, athletes, A-listers behaving like ghosts. One couple drifted past him, heels in a robe. It didn't feel like a party, Eddie said. It felt like a ritual. And then Diddy appeared, arms wide, smile rehearsed. Brother, he said, it's about time you came home. The jury sat forward. Diddy sat still. This is where choices get made. Eddie followed Diddy down a corridor lined with velvet and silence. The music never started. The drinks were props. He was shown rooms, told who inside had passed the test. That guy just greenlit a $200 million film, Diddy whispered. That one eats out of my hand now. Then came the door, a thick wooden slab with a visible gap. Inside, a tripod stood in full view. No attempt to hide it. This, Diddy said, is where the choices get made. The line landed cold. You want to stay funny and broke, he said, or you want to level up. Eddie tried to laugh. Diddy didn't. Inside, people went in nervous. They came out grinning, or hollow. I didn't step in, Eddie testified. I stepped back, outside again, trying to breathe. A woman intercepted him. You're not done yet, are you? She asked, handing him a drink. Then she said the phrase again, the experience. He walked back in. A long table, velvet drapes, candles, silver trays. No one spoke. He was seated beside a younger action star. When pressed, Eddie confirmed the name, Dwayne Johnson. Diddy stood at the head of the table, arms spread. Tonight's about how far you'll go, he said, because greatness doesn't come cheap. A tray was placed before Johnson. A gloved man lifted the lid. Raw monkey brains, pink and steaming. Come on, Rock, Diddy said. You eat that, the roll is yours. The courtroom fell into a freeze frame. Dwayne hesitated, Eddie said. Then he did it. Diddy clapped like a proud father. That's what I'm talking about. He moved down the table, tray after tray, and then he stood in front of Eddie. You ready, preacher boy? I didn't come here for this. Then why are you here? Eddie didn't answer. He stood, walked, not ran toward the door. I wasn't afraid of what they'd do to me, he said. I was afraid of what they'd do to others. Behind him, Diddy shouted, You'll be back when you're ready to really make it. But he never went back. He tried to work, scripts, pitches, voiceovers, meetings with smiles, but no follow-ups. One executive's email read, He's not aligned with what Eddie asked the jury, with monkey brains. With that room, studios ghosted him. His longtime agent stopped picking up. Projects vanished. They didn't need to fire me. They just needed to stop calling. It was precise, cold, silent. The blacklist, he said, not loud, just final. And worse, it wasn't just Diddy. It was the system that protected him. There's a list Eddie revealed, an unwritten one. Tyler Perry was on it, Oprah Winfrey too. They didn't have to join the darkness, he said. They just had to look away. You don't hear the door close, Eddie said. You just notice it never opens again. His voice broke once, only once, when he talked about his children. They saved me, he said. Their laughter. It reminded me what was real. He never wrote a book, never sold a special. Because he said, the people who own the microphones are the same people who own the secrets. So he waited, until now. Because now Cassie had taken the stand. Monique, too. The silence was cracking. I'd rather be the next to fall for truth, Eddie said, than sit protecting a lie. He looked at Diddy, then the jury. This isn't about taking him down, he said. It's about making sure no one else is built up by him again. The judge called a recess. The courtroom rose not out of protocol, but out of something else. Respect. Court resumed at 10:17 a.m. The energy had shifted. No more murmurs, no more curiosity. Just gravity. The type that settles over a room when something irreversible has been said. Eddie Murphy retook the stand, his posture unchanged, his expression composed, but his words, those came with weight. What happened that night, he said, wasn't just wrong. It was designed to test desperation. He clarified what many already suspected: the party was never about celebration. It was initiation, into what exactly he let the courtroom decide. But the consequences, he could speak to those directly. Weeks after the night at Diddy's mansion, Murphy noticed the first cracks. A greenlit project shelved, a recurring voiceover contract quietly reassigned. Roles he'd been attached to written for were suddenly up for reconsideration. His agent of 7 years, gone, no explanation, no confrontation, just silence. I didn't walk out of a party, Eddie said. I walked out of Hollywood's inner sanctum. He submitted call logs, emails, texts, all time-stamped, all showing a pattern: interest, then distance, alignment, then rejection. No studio heads said it aloud. They didn't have to. A whisper can close more doors than a verdict. One executive's internal note leaked through Discovery read only 5 words. Eddie didn't pass the test. What test, the prosecutor asked. Eddie leaned forward. The test of compliance, he said. The test of obedience, not morality. Then he paused, looked at the jury. Because that night the ones who passed didn't walk out. The courtroom sat motionless as Eddie expanded on the most chilling aspect yet. There's a list, he said. Unwritten, but known. On it, names never to criticize. People you don't cross. Power brokers whose image is untouchable. Speak against them, and your name moves to another list. The one of those to avoid. It's not maintained. It doesn't need to be. It's a boundary, he said, not on paper, but everywhere. He listed 3 names: Diddy, Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey. They don't all do what Diddy did, he clarified, but they protect the system that let him do it. The defense objected. The judge instructed the jury to ignore conjecture. Eddie didn't argue. He simply added, I'm not speculating. I lived it. When asked if he'd ever tried to speak up before, Eddie nodded. I confided in someone I trusted, an actor, someone I once called a brother. What did he say? He told me, you're crossing the line, man. They don't come back for people who cross it. That actor has never spoken to him since. That's the price, Eddie said. You speak the truth, you lose your circle. He handed the court more evidence: emails, call, logs, text messages. Before and after the party. Before enthusiasm. After absence. They don't fire you, he said. They forget you. The prosecutor shifted to the personal. How did this affect you? Eddie hesitated for the first time. It broke me, he said. Not all at once, but piece by piece. There were days he didn't leave the house, days he didn't answer the phone. He stopped writing, stopped pitching. You start to question yourself, he admitted. Maybe it's the market, maybe it's timing, but then the whispers reach you. Not aligned, pass, too risky. Their silence, he said, screams the loudest. He gripped the microphone stand, not for drama, for stability. He leaned on his children. They didn't know what was happening, he said. But their laughter saved me. It reminded me there was still something pure. He leaned on faith, not as image, but as anchor. I stopped asking God why he said. I started asking when. When would it be time to speak? When would the world be ready to hear? The courtroom was quiet. No coughs, no phones, just waiting. Why didn't you write a book, do a podcast, an expose? The prosecutor asked. Eddie answered without irony. Because the people who own the microphones are the same ones who own the secrets. He didn't want fame or redemption. I wanted peace, he said. And peace only comes when truth is louder than the lie. So, why now? 3 reasons. Cassie Ventura took the stand. Monique followed with documents. Then came the audio prints from beyond the grave, warning the world about what no one wanted to hear while he lived. It shifted something Eddie said. The silence cracked, and I couldn't sit this one out. He knew the risks: retaliation, misrepresentation, isolation. But I'd rather fall for the truth, he said, than stand still protecting a lie. He looked across the courtroom. I'm not here to destroy Diddy. I'm here so no one else gets built up by him again. As he ended his second day of testimony, something in the room had changed. Jurors leaned forward not out of curiosity, but connection. They'd heard about Hollywood lies before. This one didn't sound like gossip, it sounded like gospel. And for the first time, the ugliest parts of fame weren't whispered in TMZ headlines. They were sworn into the federal record. As Eddie stepped down from the stand, reporters didn't chase him. They just watched and wrote. Not about a fallen star, but about a man who walked away before the fire started and came back only to tell the world where the smoke was coming from. Day 13 opened under tighter security, not because of a threat, but because of truth, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that unnerves. The courtroom filled faster. No shows yesterday were early today, because the question had changed. It wasn't did Eddie Murphy tell the truth? It was how deep does this go? And that's when Eddie returned to the stand. The judge confirmed he would continue under direct examination. No objections this time, not from the defense, not after the silence that followed part 1. Eddie began simply, Hollywood doesn't erase you loudly, he said. It erases you politely. He described what followed his refusal at the party. Projects died mid-prep. Scripts were sent back unread. Longtime collaborators gave vague excuses. His own team began shrinking, and yet there was no memo. No blacklist email, just a change in tone. Doors didn't slam shut, he said. They just didn't open. He likened it to being outside a building where you once had keys. Now you're knocking, and no one answers. They don't say you're banned. They say, we're going in a different direction. He smiled bitterly. And that direction is silence. The prosecution pressed on the mechanics of the so-called system. Are you suggesting this was coordinated? No, Eddie replied. It's worse than that. He explained it's not a conspiracy. It's a culture, a dinner here, a call there. A conversation where someone says, he's a liability now. That's all it takes. A producer once close to Murphy told a mutual friend, he said no when he was supposed to say yes. That Eddie said was all it took. The courtroom projector lit up. Call logs, declined meetings, voicemail transcriptions. Dozens of communications that ended not with rejection, but absence. This is how you cancel someone without saying it, Eddie told the jury. You just stop. By the time 2008 rolled in, Eddie wasn't just out of work. He was out of context. The public narrative said he faded. He hadn't. He was erased. And here the testimony darkened again. You think Diddy did this alone? He asked. Heads shook silently. Nobody believed that anymore. He had help, protection, infrastructure. He gestured toward the gallery metaphorically. There's a network. Some joined the darkness, others just looked away. He returned to the names on the list. Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey. They didn't host the parties, Eddie clarified, but they upheld the silence. The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for decorum. I'm not here to attack them, Eddie said. I'm here to end the illusion that silence is neutral. Did you try to warn anyone? Eddie nodded. Once. I told a friend what I'd seen. He told me never to say it again. Why? Because he was scared. Because he knew it was true. They haven't spoken since. It hurts, Eddie admitted. But not as much as watching someone eat something they didn't want. just to keep their career alive. The prosecutor shifted the tone. How did this affect others? Eddie paused. That's the part that keeps me up. He described the faces from the party, some familiar, some strangers, all of them performing obedience. They thought they didn't have a choice. That's the real horror. He spoke about a rising singer who disappeared from the charts, a young actor whose name never came up again. No crimes, just choices they didn't make. They thought they could walk out like I did, he said. But the machine doesn't reward that. Why didn't you expose this earlier? The prosecution asked again. Eddie didn't flinch, because the microphones weren't pointed at me. They were pointed at the ones who smiled through it. He tried, quietly, indirectly, through coded interviews, projects with metaphor. But they didn't land. You can't speak truth in a room where everyone's paid not to listen. He admitted the years that followed were hard. Not financially, though. He felt the squeeze, but emotionally. I started to wonder if I imagined it. He didn't. Because when the trial began and witnesses like Cassie and Monique took the stand, everything clicked. It wasn't just me, he said. I wasn't crazy. I was just early. Did anyone try to silence him? Now I've received threats, he said. Nothing direct, just shadows. Like what old friends calling with concern. Cryptic texts. One said, "Don't burn the house down just because they locked you out." He smiled. Maybe the house needs to burn. As the part closed, Eddie stared down the camera, metaphorically, perhaps literally. This isn't about Diddy's guilt alone, he said. It's about whether we keep pretending this is just how things work. He ended with one of the most potent lines yet. This machine doesn't run on talent, it runs on submission. And the minute you stop nodding, it spits you out. The courtroom didn't react loudly, but they didn't blink. And that, for Eddie Murphy, was enough. The gallery was quieter today, not out of disinterest, out of reverence. Eddie Murphy had peeled back the curtain, and what lay behind wasn't just one man's downfall. It was an industry's design. But today's testimony wasn't about Diddy's parties. It was about what followed, because what happens after the refusal is where the real story begins. Eddie began with a memory. I submitted a script, he said. A story about redemption. A man loses everything, then finds something real, family, faith. He pitched it to 4 networks. Every single one passed. Not with notes, not with criticism, with silence. That same week, a project he was promised vanished. The studio called it a realignment of priorities. But Eddie had learned what that meant. You're no longer useful. You're a reminder. He wasn't blackballed publicly. There were no angry tweets, no scandals. Just a new label whispered in halls and boardrooms. Difficult, overly principled, not aligned. The prosecution showed emails, studio memos where Eddie's name appeared beside words like unreliable and pass. All for the same reason, he said no. Eddie shifted in his seat. I used to think Hollywood rewarded talent, he said. Now I know it rewards obedience. He described watching peers rise, not because they were better, but because they played the game. They attended the right events, said the right things, looked the other way. He never named names. He didn't need to. The jury could fill in the blanks. They teach you how to be quiet, Eddie said. Not directly, through implication. Don't ask questions. Don't mention the wrong people. Don't tell the truth in the wrong room. You survive by forgetting what you saw. He didn't survive, but he did live. Everything changed when the trial began. Cassie went first, Eddie said. Her voice shook, but she spoke. Then Monique with receipts. And finally a long-buried audio recording of Prince. 3 voices decades apart saying the same thing. It's not paranoia, it's policy. I realized Eddie said that silence wasn't noble. It was complicity. So he called his lawyer, and he volunteered. I called a director I used to work with, Eddie said. Told him I was testifying. What did he say? He said, "Do what you have to do," then hung up. We haven't spoken since. The prosecution leaned in. Do you regret it? Eddie didn't blink. I regret staying silent this long. He spoke of what he'd lost. Yes, roles, yes, money. But more than that voice. They didn't take away my career. They took away my clarity. For years he questioned himself. Maybe I should have played along, he admitted. But then I remember the faces at that table, the fear, the performance, and he knew he chose right. Eddie named no names, but he described the pattern. Actors who vanished, musicians who burned out. Writers who couldn't get in the room. They all said no. That's what we had in common. The courtroom sat still, because the myth was dead. This wasn't just one man's story. It was an indictment. They think resistance means shouting, Eddie said. Sometimes it's walking away. He didn't out anyone. He didn't need to. His silence back then spoke volumes. Now, so did his testimony. Through all of it, Diddy remained stone-faced, unmoved. Until Eddie said one line, "This man didn't build an empire, he built a trap." For the first time, Diddy shifted, hands clenched, jaw set. But he said nothing, because in that room, Eddie wasn't the one on trial, not anymore. The final minutes of Part 4 came with a shift in tone. Less sorrow, more resolve. "They think we'll always be afraid," Eddie said, "that we'll protect the illusion to preserve our own reflection." He paused, looked at the jury. Maybe the house needs to burn. Maybe the silence we built it on was never meant to last. The judge ordered a break, but the courtroom didn't rise right away. No one wanted to move, because when the lie is finally exposed, it demands not just attention, but action. Court reconvened at 3:11 p.m. The gallery was full, not just with spectators, but with silence, the kind that comes before a reckoning. Eddie Murphy returned to the witness stand for what would be the final segment of his testimony, not to revisit pain, but to clarify purpose, not a confession, a warning. He began with this: "I didn't come here to confess. I came here to testify. There's a difference. A confession begs for forgiveness. A testimony demands attention." Eddie wasn't looking for absolution. He was demanding recognition for himself and for every name that vanished without a headline. "The lie we sell in this industry," Eddie said, "is that success is about talent. It's not. It's about submission." He paused. "Because the minute you stop nodding, stop pretending, you become a liability." He wasn't bitter, just blunt. "This town doesn't need proof you're difficult. It only needs proof you're principled." The courtroom stayed silent, because no one, not even the defense, could argue with that. Eddie looked at the jury. What happened at those parties wasn't chaos. It was a system built on fear, on favors, on forced silence. "I saw grown men eat monkey brains to land a casting sheet." He waited, let the sentence breathe, then added, "And the ones laughing loudest, they weren't victims, they were architects." He didn't paint Diddy as a monster in isolation. He painted him as a product of a machine that protects its investments. "They don't protect innocence," Eddie said. "They protect influence." The prosecution asked, "Do you believe this system still operates today?" Eddie nodded. "If anything, it's evolved. NDAs, whisper campaigns, creative differences. It all sounds professional until you know what to look for." "I didn't get canceled," Eddie said. "I got ghosted. Studios didn't blacklist him officially. They just stopped replying." That's how real erasure works. No drama, just deletion. The prosecutor asked if he still believed in Hollywood. "I believe in storytellers," he said, "not in the gatekeepers." And then came the final question. "In your opinion, Mr. Murphy, what's the most important thing the jury and public should take from your testimony?" Eddie didn't rush. He looked at the ceiling, then down, then leaned in. That Hollywood doesn't run on talent. It runs on submission. A pause. It rewards obedience, not integrity. He described watching careers implode not from scandal, but from resistance. People who dared to say no. People who simply didn't say yes fast enough. "That house I walked into in 2006, he said, "it wasn't a home. It was a test. He passed, but the industry failed. You don't have to sell your soul." "But you don't have to sell your soul in Hollywood," Eddie said. "But if you don't, they'll convince everyone you never had one to begin with." The room didn't move. He'd said a lot, but that line, that's the one that would headline. He stood up. The judge thanked him. And as he turned to leave, dozens rose too, not for etiquette, for respect. Diddy sat motionless. His attorneys shuffled. His supporters quiet. Eddie passed them all, not to gloat, but because the truth doesn't need volume to echo. The prosecutor asked if he had one last comment. He turned, faced the court, and said, "Don't protect the pretty lie. A breath. Let the truth be ugly." Then he walked out. No applause, no soundtrack. Just a door closing quietly behind the only man in the room who didn't need Hollywood anymore. because he finally had something it couldn't give him: peace.